Arizona Territory, 1876. The sun was barely up when Holden Hartley spotted the woman trudging along the edge of his land. Two boys trailing behind her, and a wagon axle snapped clean in two. He had not spoken more than 10 words to a soul in over 6 months. His boots crunched over the dry earth as he stepped off his porch. The oldest boy looked like he was trying not to cry, and the younger one was dragging a wooden toy horse by a string, its one wheel clunking in the dust. The woman's dress was frayed at the hem, her hair a mess of dark curls pinned back in a rush, and she held herself like someone who had not rested in days. Still, she stood straight when she saw him. Eyes sharp, chin lifted. "Wagon broke," she said before he could open his mouth. "I have no husband." "Just my boys, we walked through the night." Holden looked past her at the busted wheel. "You are lucky this road comes through my land. There is nothing for 30 miles west. I know. I was not given much choice." Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes flickered. "My name is Mabel Vaughn. That's Wallace and Warren." Holden looked down at the boys. Wallace was maybe 10, skinny as a rail, with a protective hand on his little brother's shoulder. Warren could not have been more than 6, blinking up at Holden with big eyes and dust on his cheeks. "I'm Holden Hartley," he said. "You need water? We do." Mabel's fingers tightened on the boy's shoulders. "And a wheelwright, but I will accept the water first." He nodded and turned. "Well then, come on." They followed him up the path to his porch, the boys stumbling a little in their worn boots. Holden grabbed the dipper from the well and passed it to Wallace first, then Warren. Mabel waited until they were done before taking a sip herself. She drank like someone used to rationing. "Where were you headed?" Holden asked. "North. My brother had a claim near Prescott." She looked toward the broken wagon. "I doubt we will make it now." He watched the way she touched her sons' backs while she spoke, keeping them close but not clinging. There was strength there, not loud, not showy, but real. "You can rest here," Holden said. "I have food, water, shade." She hesitated. "I do not take charity. I'm not offering any," he said, "just being neighborly." She looked at him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Then thank you." That night, Holden cooked beans and cornbread over the stove while the boys sat on the steps, whispering and laughing over a beetle crawling across the porch. Holden had not heard laughter on that porch since Rebecca died, not in over 2 years. That night, he sat in his chair near the fire, watching Mabel tuck the boys onto a quilt in the corner. She smoothed their hair, kissed their foreheads. Her face softened when she looked at them. "You lost someone," she said quietly, not looking at him. "Yes. Wife," he nodded. She did not say she was sorry. She just nodded once, like she understood. In the morning, he hitched up his wagon and rode out to fetch a wheelwright from town. When he returned, Mabel was hauling water in a tin pail, sleeves rolled, hair tied back tighter. Wallace was stacking kindling. Warren was singing to the chickens. By the afternoon, the wheel was fixed. She could have left, but she did not. "The boys are tired," she said. "And you have been kind." Holden shrugged. "You are welcome to stay another night," she did, and then another and another. On the 5th morning, Holden found Wallace sitting on the porch rail, carving a stick with one of his old knives. "You ever fish, Wallace?" The boy looked up, surprised. "Not really." "Come on then, I'll show you." They came back with 2 small trout. Mabel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night, the porch was full of firelight and the smell of fresh fish, and Warren burst into giggles when Holden taught him how to whistle through a blade of grass. Mabel laughed, a real laugh, head tipped back, and it hit Holden in the chest like a bullet. He went inside after dark, heart pounding. He stood at the mantel, staring into the cold fireplace. "I do not know what you are doing," he whispered, voice low, "but I feel it, I feel it." He had not spoken to Rebecca in over a year, but tonight it felt right. The next morning, Wallace was up early, sweeping the floor with more effort than skill. Holden sipped his coffee, watching through the window. Mabel stepped up beside him silently. "They like you," she said. "I like them too." She turned, met his eyes. "I never expected any of this." "Neither did I." She took a slow breath. "My husband died 2 winters ago. Diphtheria. Wallace tried to help me bury him, but the ground was too hard." Holden swallowed. "I sold everything I could and packed the wagon. I did not know what else to do." "You did right," Holden said. She nodded once. I had not seen them laugh like that in months. He glanced at the porch. "They have good laughs," he said. That night, Mabel sat beside him on the porch swing, the boys asleep inside. The cicadas hummed. Her hand brushed his when she reached for her cup. She did not pull back. Neither did he. By the 7th morning, the hens had grown used to Warren's whispering. He'd taken to crouching beside the coop at dawn, murmuring something through the slats while Wallace waited by the barn, watching the horizon like it might change its mind. Holden found Mabel near the back fence, kneeling in the weeds with her hands deep in the soil. She looked up at him with dirt on her cheekbone and a sprig of wild onion in her fist. "Your ground's stubborn," she said. "So am I." She pushed to her feet, brushing her skirt with the back of her hand. "I noticed." The days had turned warm again, the kind of heat that baked the wind dry and left sweat clinging to the backs of knees. Mabel tied a wet kerchief around her neck and took to pulling water from the well before the sun climbed too high. She never asked for help, but Wallace had started trailing her without being told, carrying the pail between them without a word. Holden watched from the porch, the handle of his mug warm against his palm. He didn't speak until she set the pail down at the door. "You don't have to work like this." "I know." She wiped her forehead. "But if I stand still, I start remembering things I'd rather not." He nodded once, then stepped aside so she could go in. That evening, Warren fell asleep at the supper table, his cheek pressed against his tin plate. Wallace carried him to the quilts, careful not to wake him. Mabel lingered near the stove, folding a dish towel with more care than it needed. "He's softer than he pretends," she said. Holden leaned his hip against the counter. "Wallace, he's been trying to be the man of the house since he was 8. I don't think he remembers how to be a boy anymore." Holden didn't answer right away. He thought of the way Wallace had taken to feeding the mule without being asked, the way he checked the latch on the chicken pen each night before retiring. "I can show him how to build a fly box," Holden said. "If he's interested." Mabel looked up. He'd be honored. Later, when the house had quieted, Holden sat on the step of the porch, knife in hand, carving a strip of cedar. He wasn't sure what shape it would take yet, but his fingers moved with a steadiness he hadn't felt in years. Mabel joined him without a word, lowering herself onto the step beside him with a shawl over her shoulders. "Did you ever think you'd be alone this long?" she asked after a time. He shook his head. "Didn't think about much after she passed. Just kept breathing." Her hands were wrapped around her knees. "I used to think grief was loud, that it came in storms, but it's quiet mostly. Like waking up to find you've lost something and you can't remember what." She turned toward him. "Exactly." The moon was sharp and pale over the yard, laying silver light across the fence posts. Holden set the carving aside and rested his elbows on his knees. "You're strong," he said. "Not just for what you've done, but for how you keep going." "I don't feel strong. Doesn't matter." "You are." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. In the morning, Mabel sent Wallace with Holden to check the lower pasture. The boy rode beside him, straight-backed and quiet at first. Half a mile out, he asked how to tell if a fence was weak, and Holden showed him, explaining how to watch for leaning posts and tracks where animals shouldn't be. On the way back, Wallace asked about the rifle Holden kept slung by the saddle. "You ever use it?" "Only when I need to." "Wild dogs came through once." The boy nodded solemnly. "I think I'm ready to learn. Mama says I'm to wait, but I want to be useful." Holden studied him for a long second. "Then we'll ask her together." That afternoon, Mabel stood beside the porch rail, arms crossed, listening as Wallace explained himself. When he finished, she looked between the two of them. "You'll learn to handle it with respect," she said finally, "and only if Holden teaches you. I won't have you pretending at heroics." Wallace's face cracked into something he hadn't shown before, not quite joy, but something close. Once the sun dipped down, Holden moved the extra cot into the boys' corner, replacing the thin blanket with one of his better quilts. Mabel leaned in the doorway, watching. "I hadn't planned to stay this long," she said. "I hadn't planned for company at all. Doesn't seem to bother you." "It doesn't." She stepped into the room, her voice low. "I've watched the way you are with them. You don't push. You don't ask more than they can give." He looked at her then, really looked. "They deserve that, so do you." He didn't speak again, but when she reached for his hand, he didn't hesitate. Her fingers were calloused, her palm warm. She held on steady as if she meant it. The wind changed on the 9th day. It carried the scent of rain from the east, low and heavy, threading through the cottonwoods behind the barn. Holden stepped into the yard with a rope coiled over his shoulder and paused to taste the air. The sky hadn't broken yet, but it would by nightfall. He found Mabel kneeling beside the stove inside, sorting beans with a practiced rhythm. Her hair had slipped from its pins again, a loose strand curling behind her ear. "Storm's coming in," he said. She glanced up without halting her hands. "Will it flood? Not likely. But the roof leaks some near the back wall. I'll move the quilts." He nodded once. "I'll patch it tomorrow." They didn't speak more than that, but later, when the first drops splattered against the window panes, Mabel tucked an extra blanket around Warren's feet and pressed her palm to the sill. Her eyes stayed on the glass while thunder rolled somewhere far off. Holden lit the lantern and set it on the table. "You afraid of storms?" "No," she shook her head, her voice quiet. "But Wallace used to be. After the war ended, our town had nothing but ruined fields and widowed girls. He was born into silence. When the thunder came, he thought it meant something was falling apart again." Holden listened, folding his arms over his chest. "He doesn't flinch now," she said, "but he watches the sky like it owes him something." Holden leaned against the wall. "You watch it the same way." She looked over, and something passed between them, unspoken but understood. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the ground soft and the air sweet. Wallace helped Holden mend the loose shingles while Warren sat on the fence, humming tunelessly and kicking his heels. Mabel scrubbed the floor with a brush she found in the shed, sleeves rolled above her elbows. It wasn't her house, but she moved through it like she was setting something right. That evening, she handed Holden a stitched cloth pouch, the seams uneven but tight. "For your carving tools," she said. "You left them out last night." He took it, fingers brushing hers. "You sew?" "I was a seamstress before I married. My mother taught me when I was small." Her gaze softened. "I haven't made anything for anyone in a long while." He turned the pouch over in his hands. "It's good work." She crossed her arms, watching the boys chase each other in the yard. "Wallace told me you used to teach scripture once." Holden's hand stilled. "Years back. Before I came west." "Why'd you stop?" He looked toward the hills, jaw working. "Didn't seem right to speak of redemption when I couldn't feel it myself." She was quiet a moment. "I think you carry more grace than you know." He didn't answer. But that night, when the house settled into quiet, he opened the old Bible from the bottom drawer and ran a hand over the worn cover. The next few days passed in steady rhythm. Wallace helped Holden set fence posts along the south line, learning the weight of the post hole digger without complaint. Mabel baked shortbread from flour she found tucked behind the dry goods, and Warren insisted on feeding the goat himself, naming it Captain without asking permission. One evening, as the sun bled down the horizon, Mabel brought 2 mugs of chicory to the porch steps, passing one to Holden without a word. They sat side by side, watching Warren draw shapes in the dust with a stick while Wallace squinted at the sky. "I never asked what brought you this far west," she said. Holden took a sip, the bitter warmth grounding him. "I left Tennessee after the fever took her. I couldn't stay in that house." Mabel looked at him but didn't speak. There was a rocking chair she used to sit in. Still creaked after she passed. I'd hear it moving at night. His voice was low. I couldn't listen to it anymore. Mabel reached for his hand, not suddenly but sure. Her fingers closed around his with quiet strength. "I had a cedar cradle," she said. "Wallace slept in it when he was small. I left it behind when I packed the wagon. Couldn't bear to see it empty." Holden turned toward her, their hands still joined. "I don't want you to leave," he said. She took a breath. "We still have far to go. You could stay." Her voice was steady. "I don't want to be someone's burden." "You're not. You never were." He held her gaze. "You've brought this place back to life." The silence between them deepened, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything neither of them had dared hope for. Inside, the boys lay curled beneath quilts, breathing even and safe. Outside, the land stretched quiet beneath the stars, and something long dormant stirred in Holden's chest, not grief, not memory. Something warmer. Beside him, Mabel leaned her shoulder into his, and he let her. Neither of them moved. The porch held them like a promise. The days leveled into something close to rhythm. Not a routine, not yet, but a shape beginning to form like clay wet in the hand, waiting to be worked. Holden found himself waking before the rooster, not from habit, but from want. The low hush of Mabel's steps in the kitchen, the scratch of Wallace's boots outside the door, even Warren's uneven singing, it all pulled him from sleep with a softness he hadn't known he could feel again. On the 11th day, Mabel stood near the barn with Holden's hat turned awkwardly in her hands. It hung too large over her brow, casting shadow down her face. "I need to ride to the trading post," she said, eyes on the saddle he was tightening. "There are things I can't keep borrowing forever." He looked up. "You'll ride Jasper if he'll let me. He's stubborn in the morning, like someone else I know." She didn't smile, but her mouth curved faintly before she turned toward the corral. Holden saddled his own horse and followed. "You're not going alone," a glance over her shoulder. "I've gone farther with less. That may be, but I'm coming." She didn't argue. Wallace stayed behind, content to mend Warren's toy horse with a length of twine and some glue Holden had forgotten he owned. Before they left, Mabel knelt by the boys, speaking low enough that Holden couldn't catch the words, then stood and mounted Jasper like she'd done it 100 times. The road east was dry and rutted, framed by mesquite and the pale stretch of prairie grass. They rode in silence for a time, the sound of hooves steady beneath them. Holden broke it first. "You always sew by hand, or did you ever work a treadle?" "My brother had a treadle singer in Missouri," she said, "but I never liked the noise of it. Felt like the machine was trying to outpace me." He glanced over. "I used to think the quiet was something to survive. You make it feel different." She didn't speak right away. When she did, it was soft. "Maybe it's not the quiet that's different. Maybe it's just not empty anymore." At the post, Mabel moved with purpose. She bartered for flour, a twist of tobacco for Holden, and a length of muslin she said would do for shirts if the boys kept growing the way they were. Holden stood back, watching the way she tallied figures in her head while the shopkeep haggled. "You always this precise?" he asked as they loaded the sack onto Jasper's flank. "I had to be." Counting mattered when there was only so much to go around. They rode slower on the way back, the sun casting long shadows behind them. At one point, she reached for her canteen and passed it without being asked. He drank, handed it back, and caught the edge of her gaze lingering. "You've made this place into something I didn't expect," she said. "Wasn't much of a place before. It's not the land I mean." She didn't explain further, and he didn't press her. By the time they reached the house, Wallace had started a fire in the yard ring, and Warren had set 4 stones in a square for the supper dance, he declared brightly, before toppling over in a fit of laughter. Later, after the boys had been tucked in, Mabel stepped out onto the porch with a shawl thrown over her shoulders. Holden was already there, sitting with a knife in his hand and a block of hickory resting on his knee. "You carve every night now?" she asked. "Only since you brought laughter back to the porch." She leaned against the post. "I didn't plan on that, neither did I." He set the hickory aside and stood, the porch creaking beneath his boots. She didn't move as he stepped closer, didn't flinch when his hand brushed hers. The night was still, windless, and the stars were laid out like scattered salt across the sky. "Tell me what you want," he said quietly. "I want a place where I don't have to keep starting over." "You have it," her eyes softened. "And you," his voice was steady. "I want to wake beside someone who knows what it means to stay." She reached up and touched his face, the rough edge of her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Her lips found his, gentle and sure, and when they parted, her forehead rested against his shoulder. Inside, the lantern flickered low, casting their shadows long across the floorboards. Outside, the earth held its breath, and everything, at last, felt like it belonged. Mabel woke to the sound of quiet conversation outside the window, Wallace's voice low, careful, and Holden's deeper in reply. She didn't catch the words, only the cadence, the way Wallace asked like he trusted the answer, and the way Holden answered like it mattered. She rose quietly, pulled her shawl over her shoulders, and stepped out into the early light. The sun hadn't crested the ridge yet, but the sky was pale with promise. Wallace sat cross-legged on the porch, a spool of wire in his hands. Holden was crouched beside him, walking him through the way to tighten a loop without snapping the strand. Mabel didn't interrupt. She leaned against the doorway, watching. When Wallace finally caught sight of her, he lifted the wire with a small, proud nod. He said, "I can mend the chicken pen myself now," he said. "You'll be careful of your fingers?" she asked, He grinned, already gathering his tools. "Yes, ma'am." When he disappeared around the side of the house, Holden rose and brushed off his knees. "You're teaching him more than chores," she said. "He wants to know how to hold things together. I figure that's as good a place to start as any." She didn't speak right away. "Then, do you ever think about building something new?" Holden met her eyes. "I think about it more now." That afternoon, while the boys took turns hammering boards into a makeshift coop extension, Mabel sat at the table inside, spreading the muslin she'd bought across the wood. She marked out the pieces for shirts with the edge of a bone-handled knife, her brow furrowed in concentration. Holden watched from the doorway, arms folded. "I've got some old shirts you can cut for patterns," he offered. "I'd like that." She didn't look up. "Once these are finished, I thought I'd try curtains for the back room. That window near the cot sun comes in fierce in the morning." Holden stepped into the room. "You thinking of staying long enough to need curtains?" She set the knife down and looked at him. "I'm not thinking of leaving." It was the first time she'd said it plain. Holden nodded once and stepped closer. "Then I'll fix that latch on the window before the rains come again." She reached for his hand and he let her take it. That evening, after the boys had fallen asleep side by side with their feet tangled in the quilt, Holden and Mabel walked out to the pasture. The air was warm, the sky clear enough to see stars winking past the ridge. The horses dozed near the fence, tails flicking lazily. "I never imagined this life," Mabel said. "Not like this, not with someone who listens. I never thought I'd have another chance to share one." They stopped near the leaning oak, the one that had stood dead since the last drought but hadn't fallen yet. Mabel reached out and ran her fingers over the bark. "I think about what the boys will remember," she said. "Not just of the bad years, but what comes after, what they'll carry forward." Holden looked toward the house, where the faint glow of lamplight still flickered through the front window. "They'll remember you taught them how to start again and not be afraid of it." She turned toward him. "And you? I'll remember how you walked onto my land and gave me back a reason to speak." She stepped into his arms, then no hesitation, no questions. He held her, his chin resting atop her hair, and she breathed deep, steady against him. They didn't kiss this time. They didn't need to. The next morning, Holden hitched the wagon and took Mabel and the boys into town. Wallace sat beside him on the bench, proud and tall, while Mabel and Warren rode in the back, pointing at birds and naming them like they were old friends. They registered the land under all their names: Holden's, Mabel's, Wallace's, and Warren's. The clerk raised a brow but didn't ask questions. Just took the payment and signed the paper. Holden bought lumber and nails. Mabel picked up more cloth, a skein of dyed thread, and a small tin of rose-scented soap she didn't mention to anyone. Wallace found a tin whistle, spent his own coin on it, and Warren bartered for a slingshot with a broken band. By the time they returned, the sun was low again, casting long gold across the porch. Holden unloaded the wagon, and Mabel stood beside him, quiet. "You planning to build something?" she asked, nodding at the boards. "A back room," he said. "For you, for them, for us." Her hand found his, and they stood there for a long time without moving. Weeks passed, and the room took shape. Wallace helped hold beams steady while Holden hammered. Warren fetched nails and sang to the chickens. Mabel planted herbs near the back stoop, and the muslin curtains fluttered in the breeze each evening when the windows were open. One night, after supper, Holden took Mabel's hand and led her outside. The boys were asleep, and the moon was high. "I've got no ring," he said, "but I've got this land, this house, and the will to hold you every morning you'll have me." Mabel looked up at him, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. "I don't need a ring. I just need you to keep showing up at sunrise." "I will." She kissed him then, slow and certain, and he kissed her back. There was no rush to it, only the quiet knowledge that this was theirs and it would hold. The house filled out in the months that followed. The room was finished, the curtains hemmed and hung. Mabel's sewing found its way to neighbors in exchange for eggs or flour. Wallace started carving small animals from scrap wood. Holden found an old cradle in town, repaired it with care, and placed it near the hearth, just in case. They lived simply but fully. They shared burdens and laughter, weathered dry spells and windstorms, and each night they met on the porch with coffee or cider and watched the land settle into darkness together. They never spoke of what came before unless it came gently. And when it did, they held each other through it. Their life was not loud. It was not grand, but it was whole, and it was theirs.